Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Matters. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and WJOPLP Newburyport, Joppa Radio at FM 96.3. We have a new episode on the second Saturday of every month. Each month on Spirit Matters, we'll respond to listener submitted questions or focus our discussion on a special topic. We'll also provide stories of positive change or inspiration. And some weeks we'll have a guest respondent as well. Today we have a special and very timely topic coming out of pandemic living. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and let me greet my co-host, Reverend Rebecca Bryan. Hi, Reverend Rebecca, how are you?
I'm good, Mary. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there. Happy that it's May and more spring-like with every passing day.
Yes, I agree.
Well, Reverend Rebecca, as we do each month, I'm hoping that you could share with us the quotation that you left us with at the end of the show last week, and then we can talk about any additional reflections we've had on that.
Absolutely. Yes. So last month we spoke with Ann Hazer about the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute walk and gun violence, sensible gun control. And actually that walk is coming up on Saturday here in Newburyport. And the quote we ended our conversation with her is this from Jimmy Carter. He said, "In religious and in secular affairs, the more fervent beliefs attract followers. If you are a moderate in any respect, if you're a moderate on abortion, if you're a moderate on gun control, or if you're a moderate in your religious faith, it doesn't evolve into a crusade where you're either right or wrong, good or bad, with or against us." So that was the quote, and I think it was a really interesting one, particularly from a beloved human being who I actually personally think was fairly moderate, if you will. And the reason that it struck me, Mary, so much was that it certainly is true that there are a lot of loud voices and extreme views, and that how do we get the attention and have people responding to the issues that we feel the most, the term he used was fervent about, right?
Yeah.
So it's I thought it was a very interesting perspective. I don't know, did you have time to think about it this month?
Well, I did think about it because it's, there's different ways to think about that. There's something to be said for being a crusader, I think. Depends on what you mean by a crusader, but somebody who believes passionately in something. And sometimes there are loud voices to get through when softer ones won't. On the other hand, it's good if you can be a loud voice and also not alienate or shame people. Because if you want people to follow you, you have to speak in a way that makes people want to follow you. So I thought about, I'm not a crusader. There are things I care passionately about, but I'm not a crusader or even a leader in a conventional sense. A leader needs followers, and I don't like groups. I never have.
You sure do like people, though.
Well, yes, but I've always been an individual contributor. I used to see myself as an idealist, but with time and age, I've become more of a realist, which I think is stronger and also calmer as a way to live life. There are things that I care deeply about. I care about truth and fairness. So when I come across an issue, used to be I would either teach a course on the issue or write an article about it. These days I have the morning show. Yes. And so I'll find somebody that I can invite on. I've been particularly engaged with issues that have to do with racial history in America lately. So next week, I'll be having a professor of African-American history, Howard Ashford of Oneonta, on to talk about reparations. Because it's been much in the news lately, and there's a way that people have of framing the issue, and often will argue about passionately, that's different from the way I see it. People will talk about it as though it's about trying to figure out what white people owe African Americans. And I see it very differently as something that all American citizens and inheritors of a nation that was founded upon slavery and ongoing racial brutalities and disparities, we need to think about what we all need for ourselves to be made whole. Yes. Because making amends is a foundational principle, certainly of every 12-step program. So to clear that fog of denial and addiction, I think it's more for us to reframe how we think about this. So this is something I care about. My way of dealing with it is to invite somebody on that I can talk to you about it and hopefully spread some truth, and build an audience for fairness. And that's my personal way of acting anyway, or moving forward to shed some light. Knowledge is powerful. So
Yes.
that's my way of bringing light to bear on issues that I care about.
Yes.
Any additional thoughts that you had?
Well, that's just brilliant. I would an audience for truth. I think that's fantastic. It's another perspective that I thought about this month with this is on an individual basis that, to realize that trying to do it all or do more and more and more, even though you may care about all of those things, doesn't necessarily bring about the effect that at least that I would want. So I think that for me, I think of it almost more personally, that I've had to allow myself to say, these are the issues that I'm going to really, devote my time and my energy and be a crusader for in my own life, as opposed to, because it's impossible. There are so many important things and interesting things and topics that deserve our attention and that matter. And Howard Thurman talked about, following what it is that makes you come alive. And so to me, I think of it that way too. So certainly what I try to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all have our different individual way of doing that. But coming alive is the key part. I like the way of putting it. You put that.
That's right.
Well, let's turn now to today's timely topic, coming out of pandemic living. And I can see why you would choose this topic at this time, because there's hope in the air. But I'm interested in what kinds of things you're observing right now, and what made you choose this topic for this week.
Yes. So emerging or coming out of the pandemic, it's what made me choose this for today is I think it is something that is it's a really important issue that I fear we can isolate ourselves around if we don't talk openly and honestly, right? So it's like that kind of, I should be really happy, really excited. This should be a great thing. And everyone else is feeling that way. And so why perhaps am I not, right? And hearing that from parishioners and friends and even myself, I think we are all responding to this in our own ways. There have been a lot of losses over the last year, a lot. And so not everyone, in fact, none of us are really returning to life as it was. I mean, no one is going back to what was. We can't go through a worldwide pandemic and think we're ever going to go back to exactly what was. But especially, I just want to take a moment for people who lost loved ones to just be like, oh, this is great. Now everything's wonderful. Not so much. They are entering a world that no longer has the person or people they love in it.
Right.
And so I guess it is for me a lot about recognizing the importance of, I see this as a liminal space, a liminal time. It isn't like the pandemic was and now it's not. There is that in between that, liminality is one of my favorite concepts. It's like what was isn't any longer. The pandemic, which people are resilient. We all adapted however we did, right? And created a new way of living and being. That isn't anymore. And yet exactly how things are going to be when it's all quote unquote said and done isn't either. And we're in this space of in between, in transitioning. And there was an article, a column in the New York Times. I don't know if you saw it, Adam Grant's column, where he wrote about languishing. I don't know if you saw that, but he talked about saying, it's that time where you're not really depressed, but you're not exactly happy. You're not burnt out, but you're not, revving to go and feeling a little disoriented, confused, a little numb, perhaps. I don't know. These are some of the things that I'm thinking about that I think we're not talking as much about.
Yeah. I used to read a lot about positive psychology, and Martin Seligman wrote a book called Flourishing, in which he talked about languishing as the opposite of flourishing, and with making the point that a lot of people kind of fall into a not fully alert, coming alive, as you were saying before, state
Yes.
in which you kind of languish like a plant that isn't getting its proper nourishment,
Right.
so it can't flower fully and blossom. And
Right.
he counterposed that to the idea of what was the goal of positive psychology, is to help people flourish. And
Mm.
I think it's helpful to think of those as on a spectrum,
Mhm.
on a continuum. That at the one end there can be languishing, but when we try to heal and repair ourselves, to figure out what's lacking in our lives, what we can add in, what, from a positive psychology point of view, a great source of happiness is knowing what your strengths are,
Yes.
and then utilizing them in ways that are intrinsically gratifying.
Mhm.
And so I think that there is work to be done to identify the languishing, and then to do what we can to try to restore whatever will make us as individuals and as a community and as a nation
Mm.
flourish once
Yes.
more.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that's an interesting framework to think about. What you were saying about liminality also reminded me of a wonderful model of transition by Richard Bridges. Do you
Yes.
know Bridges?
I do.
Because it
Yes.
sounds very
Mhm.
much like what he calls the
Yes.
neutral zone. And,
Yes.
and we are in something of a neutral
Right.
zone. It's a very simple, but I think very evocative model of change, where he talks about endings. And as you point out, there have been so many endings during the pandemic.
Yes.
You know, when the shutdown started in March of last year,
Right.
it was just everything
Yes.
changed,
That's
and
right.
whatever we were doing just came to a
Yes.
stop. And I think it's going to take a long time to fully understand what the losses were, and including the very challenging deaths
Yes.
that many people encountered, or the struggle with the illness itself.
Yes.
And then in the middle, before you get to new beginnings, and there's sparks in the air of that, but he uses, instead of liminality, the phrase neutral zone,
Yes.
which your description of liminality reminded me very much of that, because it's neither here nor there, as you
That's
say.
right.
It's ungrounded.
Yes.
And I know when I used to work as a therapist, people they wouldn't know what to make of the neutral zone, and they would think they were doing something wrong,
Mm.
but a good thing just happened. I remember one of my neighbors passed his PhD defense, and he said, "Mary, why am I not happy?"
That's right.
I said,
Right?
"You will be."
Yes.
But in the
That's right.
meantime,
That's
you're not
right.
necessarily happy right away.
Right.
It takes time. It's an
Yes.
adjustment. It'll
Yes.
settle in. But in the meantime, I think we have to understand that there is always a neutral zone. There
Yes.
just is. It's
That's
part of
right.
the way we process things.
Yes.
And you won't know exactly where you are, because as unsettling as it is, um, none of us know exactly how we as individuals, community, as a nation will wind up processing not just the pandemic, but so many of the crazy disruptive things that happened over the past year. We had an attempted insurrection
Right. That's
just in
right.
January,
That's
in
right.
addition to the pandemic.
That's
And
right.
more than 500,000 people, fellow citizens, died.
I
We had
know.
an election that many people are still denying turned out the way that it turned out.
Right.
And so I think there's just so much that is still profoundly unsettled that I think we're going to be liminal for a while.
Yes, I do too. And yet there's so many gifts that can come of this time if we can allow, I mean, I think a few things that are necessary. One is to just give it the space that it deserves. It's your neighbor saying, why don't I feel happy? And we set these expectations for ourselves uh, that are not humane. That isn't
Mhm.
how growth happens and integration happens. And
Yeah.
I keep thinking of the human spirit and our resiliency and how we do adapt. Even people that live in horrific situations and conditions find ways, and it becomes what's known and understood. And when that changes, it also takes us time
Mhm.
to make that adaptation. And so so during this time of liminality, I'm doing two Friday evenings
Mm.
for about an hour with folks on Zoom, of course, at this point,
Mhm.
where we first take the time to just stop and pause and name, like you were, Mary, the things that have happened in
Mhm.
whether it's your individual life, our collective lives together, what's changed in the city we live in, what stores are, have the names come off as they're no longer open, and all these changes, and do some grief work.
Mhm.
And then be able to ask ourselves, and so of the things that were good,
Mhm.
what do I want to carry forward? Right? I mean, the statistics are huge about, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but how companies are going to be operating differently. How many are never going to go back to just
Yeah.
saying you have to be in the office on these days for, these hours. And so what is it we learned about ourselves that are good things that we actually want to carry forth instead of just nilly-willy going right back to the way it had been? Let's claim the things that were good that came out of it, in terms of our
Absolutely.
perspectives, our habits, our whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
How about you? Do you have things that you've learned about yourself during this time that?
Well, yes and no.
Mhm.
I mean, I feel like I was very fortunate. I felt fortunate to live in Newburyport
Mm,
during the pandemic, because
yes.
it felt like a place where people were behaving pretty much in sane, responsible ways.
Mhm. Yeah.
And there's plenty of access to nature, which
Mhm.
is always very healing for me.
Yes.
Um, and a lot of the things that I do, I can do, like the morning show or this show,
Right.
can do it through Zoom.
Yes. Right.
I feel like there are certain things that I've missed,
Mm,
that I look forward to getting back to. I mean,
yes.
I found that I could live without them. I sing in the Newburyport Choral Society. I really miss that.
I
And,
bet you do.
Zoom is just not the same. And so in a lot of ways, I've learned the things that I have value very much about the life I
Mm,
had, and I've learned to sort of
mm.
um, deal with some of the loss simply by focusing on how grateful I am
Yes.
that they will be there. Most of them are things that I will be able to go back to.
Right.
I've almost forgotten some of the things I used to love to do, or I think it's going to be for probably I'm not the only one who will have to remember casual socializing again.
Yes. Absolutely.
you
Yes.
know,
Yes.
because it used
That's
to be
right.
easy. Oh, let's meet here, or places that don't are no longer open.
Right.
We'll get coffee.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think it will come back, but it will be a process of remembering who did I used to call up, and what did we used to do, and what
Yes.
museums did I used to love to go to.
Right.
But I feel pretty optimistic and pretty hopeful. They will come back, and I think people are very individual
Yes, that's right.
in our experiences of the
Mhm.
pandemic. Some people have certainly suffered way, way more than I did. As you point out, many people actually lost family
Mhm.
members or friends. I've been
Yes.
fortunate that I didn't. Anyway, uh, I think we'll carry on.
Yes.
We'll find out. And in the meantime, I think you're right. The Zoom gatherings that you're planning to have, there's a power in naming things
Yes, that's right.
because it makes you articulate and frame
Yes.
and understand better what some of the losses have been, what some of the benefits have been. And
Mhm.
that means I think you can inhabit those learnings
Yes,
more fully because
right.
you have a vocabulary
That's right.
to talk about them.
And they live in our bodies anyway.
They do.
Scientists are learning that more and more things other folks already knew. So when we do name them and process them, they don't have to reside, as ghosts in our bodies. They don't have to reside, causing us the aches, the pains, the
Yeah.
cutoffs, and we can, as you say, fully be in where we are. And so yeah, it's the other thing I just want to also name is I know people who had COVID who are in the long
Mm.
timers, as they're calling them. And again,
Oh,
imagine how that feels when everyone feels great, except
yeah.
I still don't hear well. I being the person who had COVID and didn't fully recover completely yet, or I'm not
Yeah.
thinking completely straight. And I guess I'm with you, Mary, that, it's all individual. And I'm just hoping we can all be kind and compassionate and sensitive to the fact that the people around us are having their own experiences and not assume that it's exactly the way ours is.
That's right. Yeah. I think thing to do is just to listen to yourself and to gently inquire and to
Yes,
listen to others when they feel ready or they want to talk about it.
that's
Um,
right.
Knowing that there is no norm, there's no right or wrong
There
way to have
isn't.
gone through the pandemic.
We can just be
Um,
curious together and holding space
mhm,
for each other and ourselves, because it
yeah.
will come back. I mean, we won't stay in the liminality forever. This isn't a
No,
forever spot,
no,
but it's an
no,
important spot.
no. Um, no, the new beginnings will come.
Yes, that's right.
They're starting to come.
That's right.
2 weekends ago, I socialized for the first time, having been fully vaccinated with other group of other people who have been
Uh-huh.
fully vaccinated, a small group,
Yes. Uh-huh.
but inside,
Inside. Wow.
inside. And it felt both novel and strange and totally familiar at the same time.
Of course.
And I think that is probably a hallmark of many of the experiences. Walking outside without a mask at Maudsley,
Mhm. Right. That's
you
right.
know, so feeling the air on your face.
Right.
So anyway, there are more experiences like that to come.
There are. Well, and I guess I also hope that, all of us take a moment and sort of register it on our memories and minds, maybe even write it down, because there'll come a day when someone in your future, maybe yourself, maybe a relative, a grandchild, will ask about these times.
Yes,
And we'll
that's
think
right.
we'll always remember. And yet we can capture it now, and we'll have it in a way that I think memory can dull a little bit. So,
Yes,
it's another
yeah,
thing that we can do in this moment is just take a moment to put it clearly in our memories so that we can
mhm,
share it in the
that's right.
future. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Well, any other thoughts on coming out of pandemic living?
Well, I wanted to share a poem. I know normally we end with your stories. Do we have time for me to share this one poem?
Absolutely.
When I like poetry, I think it can be a very healing at any time, including in these neutral zones. So entitled "The Layers," and it is by Stanley Kunitz. And I've always loved this poem, and particularly it seems relevant right now. And so I have walked through many lives, some of them my own, and I am not who I was, though some principle of being abides, from which I struggle not to stray. When I look behind, as I am compelled to look, before I can gather strength to proceed on my journey, I see the milestones dwindling toward the horizon and the slow fires trailing from the abandoned campsites over which scavenger angels wheel on heavy wings. Oh, I have made myself a tribe out of my true affections, and my tribe is scattered. How shall the heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? In a rising wind, the manic dust of my friends, those who fell along the way, bitterly stings my face. Yet I turn, exulting somewhat with my will intact to go wherever I need to go, and every stone on the road precious to me. In my darkest night, when the moon was covered and I roamed through wreckage, a nimbus clouded voice directed me. Live in the layers, not on the litter. Though I lack the art to decipher it, no doubt the next chapter in my book of transformations is already written. I am not done with my changes. Mm. I just love that.
Yeah, and it's so apropos of the
Yes.
topic. And so many wonderful phrases in there. Live in the layers, not the litter.
Right?
One
That's
can spend some time pondering that.
right. And I'm not done with my changes yet.
And I love the image of scavenger angels.
Mm.
And the idea that the next chapter in my book of transformations is already written is also provocative.
Right? It is
Pondering.
provocative. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
so thank you for sharing that with us.
yes, of course. And do
Yeah.
you have good news stories, Mary,
I
today?
have a story
Yay.
that I love this story. I think you'll like it too. It's about a 17-year-old named Dazia Taylor from Iowa, who was named a finalist in the 2021 Regenerate Science Talent Contest. And let's see, Dazia had an idea when she was just a high school junior that she read about surgical sutures that use technology in order to detect wound changes and infections that can signal the person on their smartphone. So Dazia set out to create a more cost-effective solution as an honors chemistry research project, and she found it in beets. She developed, because she was concerned, not everybody has a smartphone. What about people who can't afford smartphones, who don't have access to the technology? So she discovered a surgical suture additive from beets, from beet extract that changes color when there's an infection in the suture. It turns out that human skin is naturally acidic. And as Taylor said, when our wounds are infected, our pH increases from 5 to 8 or higher. And she found that beets also change color at the same point. So she put 2 and 2 together, and being a brilliant young woman, she came up with beet-dyed sutures that almost instantaneously change from light purple to dark purple when the pH level changes from healthy to infected.
Oh my
Isn't that
gosh,
impressive?
that's amazing. I love it.
All of these things were happening, Taylor said, and I was like, okay, this is amazing. This is really a game changer. And of course it is. So Taylor said that for her, research has never been about accolades, although she totally dominated this science contest. As she said, and I love this, this is what I really love about this. I consistently classified my project as where equity meets science. Don't you love that? Where equity meets science. When you're doing research like this, you said you have to think about the lives you're going to impact. You have to make sure that the people you're affecting, that they'll be able to have a chance to have access to it. You know, so frequently we have technological advances and a very much an unbalanced and unequal way in which people have access to getting the benefit of a technology. So as Taylor said, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think about the people affected by surgical site infection. These people are my why.
Oh,
so anyway, I just love that story.
My why.
Because there is a
crusades. Right.
Yes,
it's like that's her why.
That is her why. And she's
that.
brilliant. And so she can come up with things like that. Good for her. I think that there's our younger generations coming along that that are crusaders for equity and for fairness, for tolerance. And I personally can't wait. They should all be able to vote right now. I look forward to when they start being able to run for office.
I agree. Me too.
So
yes.
Anyway, that's Dazia Taylor. Hope for the future.
Yes.
Equity meeting science. Well, anything else, Reverend Rebecca?
I don't think so. Why don't we use this quote for this month? That the one that you picked out. I love it. Live in the layers, not the litter.
All right, live in the layers, not the litter. Very good.
I love it.
I do too. Lots to ponder there.
Yes.
Well, that's it for today, everybody. Then please join us for our next new episode on the second Saturday of June, June 12th it will be. In the meantime, your questions and suggestions for discussion topics are always welcome to be included. Just email them to spiritmattersnewbreport@gmail.com. Your name will be kept confidential if you prefer. After broadcast, Spirit Matters will replay on Channel 8 at 1 p.m. on Mondays and again on Wednesday at 9 p.m. It'll also be available on Port Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and look for playlists and then scroll down to Spirit Matters. Bye, Reverend Rebecca. Thanks so much.
Bye, Mary. Thanks so much.
Care.
Take
All right.
care.
Bye-bye.